welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into the impact of childhood experiences and, looking at how they affect us long term. You gave some really fascinating material for this one, especially these excerpts from an Oprah Winfrey interview with Dr. Bruce Perry about their book, What Happened to You. It's really got me thinking differently about, how we even define trauma.
Yeah, it is interesting how they challenge that kind of standard idea of trauma as like a single big event. They really focus on the effects of these smaller, more consistent stressors, especially, early on in childhood. That's a pretty big difference.
Yeah, and it really makes you think about things that we might have just dismissed as, part of growing up. Like Oprah talks about how corporal punishment was just normal in her community. But later on, she realized, how deeply it affected her. She even says it turned her into like a world-class people pleaser. Yeah.
And that actually brings up a super important point, I think. Just because something is normalized in a culture, it doesn't mean it doesn't have an impact on individuals. It might even be a hidden impact. And it kind of makes you wonder about, the lasting effects of things we don't even think to question.
That's so true. It makes you want to examine your own upbringing and think about what you just accepted as normal, right? But what really stood out to me was how much Oprah and Dr. Perry focus on neglect. Not even like the obvious trauma, but just the absence of that consistent and loving care, and how that can be just as damaging.
Yeah, well, think of it this way. For a young brain to develop all the healthy emotional and relational circuits, it needs certain input. When that consistent, attuned caregiving isn't there, it's almost like you're depriving the brain of essential nutrients. And the effects of that, they can be huge and they can last a really long time.
Okay, so let's get into some of the key takeaways from all this material, especially the ones that I think are going to really resonate. This is where things get interesting.
Well, one of the most powerful ideas they talk about is shifting the question from what's wrong with you to what happened to you.
It's such a simple change, but it completely changes your perspective, you know? But doesn't asking what happened to you run the risk of kind of excusing bad behavior? I mean, could it be misconstrued as letting people off the hook for things they should be accountable for?
That's a great question, and honestly, it's a really valid concern. But the point of this shift isn't to excuse behavior. It's more about trying to understand the root of it. It's about empathy and acknowledging that a lot of behaviors are actually rooted in people's experiences, especially those early childhood experiences that really shape our brains and how we respond to things.
Okay, so it's less about condoning the behavior itself and more about trying to understand the source of it. That makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. By understanding that why behind someone's actions, we can approach them with more compassion and we can actually understand on a deeper level. And that understanding is really important for both personal growth and, healing those wounds.
I see. So it seems like this shift in perspective really connects to their whole emphasis on the power of those early experiences. They talk about how in the first few years of life, the brain is so adaptable. How does that tie into this idea of understanding someone's why?
Well, imagine the brain during those first few years like a sponge, just soaking up every experience and forming these connections that shape how we understand the world and ourselves. Those experiences actually create neural pathways, these paths in our brain that influence everything from our stress responses to our relationship patterns, even down to how we see ourselves and other people.
It's like those early experiences are kind of laying the foundation for how we navigate the world, how we relate to people, and even how we handle challenges. It really highlights how important those early years are. They set the stage for so much.
Exactly. And that kind of leads us to another really important point they make, which is that trauma doesn't have to be, a capital T trauma event to have a lasting impact.
So it doesn't have to be that one single traumatic experience to leave a mark.
Right. Things like chronic stress, neglect, even things we might think of as like minor adverse experiences, those can build up and they have a really big effect on how the brain develops. They can even change the physical structure of the brain, particularly the parts that control emotional regulation and how we respond to stress.
So you're saying even small, everyday stressors can build up over time and have a big impact on our well-being overall. It's kind of like death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? Each cut on its own might not seem like much, but together they can really do some damage.
That is a very accurate analogy, and it's this cumulative effect that often makes people more vulnerable to problems later in life. Talking things like anxiety, depression, relationship issues, there's a whole list. It really makes you realize how important it is to recognize and address even what seem like small stressors, especially for kids.
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder that what might seem insignificant on the surface can actually have a big ripple effect on our well-being. It really underscores the need to be mindful of the environments we create for ourselves and the people around us, especially children.
Absolutely. Creating supportive and nurturing environments is really crucial, especially in those early years when the brain is so adaptable.
Okay, so we've talked about this shifts from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. And we've talked about the power of early experiences, especially when it comes to trauma. But Oprah and Dr. Perry also talk a lot about the importance of love as an action. What do they mean by that?
Well, they're basically saying that love, especially when it comes to young children, isn't just a feeling. It's about consistently responding to a child's needs in a way that's attuned to them. It's about meeting their needs in a way that makes them feel seen, safe, and understood. That's how healthy attachment starts.
So it's not just about hugs and kisses. It's about how we show up for someone in those everyday interactions and respond to their needs in a way that makes them feel secure and valued.
Exactly. It's those little actions repeated over and over that actually build the neural pathways in the brain for healthy relationships and emotional regulation. You can think of them like the building blocks of trust and connection.
It's like you're creating a secure base for the child so they can go out and explore the world, knowing they have somewhere safe to come back to.
That's a perfect way to put it. And when that secure base isn't there, it can really affect their relationships and their ability to handle challenges throughout their life.
This is all so fascinating. It's really making me rethink my own experiences and how they've shaped who I am. I'm excited to dive deeper into these concepts, especially this idea of love as an action. What are some specific examples of how that actually plays out in everyday life? What does it actually look like to provide that kind of consistent, attuned care? I feel like that's where a lot of people struggle.
I agree. Let's definitely explore that. We need to understand the nuances of attunement and how it affects a child's developing brain.
Yeah, let's do it.
When we talk about this love as an action thing, it's important to remember that infants and young kids experience love in a totally different way than adults do. Their needs are a lot more basic and they can't really communicate verbally.
So it's not so much about these big gestures or saying I love you. It's more about those everyday things we do.
Exactly. Think about it from a baby's point of view. Their whole world revolves around their basic needs being fed, sleeping, feeling comfortable. And when we meet those needs consistently and in a way that's responsive to them, that's actually their first experience of love.
So it's those everyday things like feeding them when they're hungry, comforting them when they're upset, changing their diaper. That's the stuff that builds a secure attachment.
That's it. And all those little actions are actually shaping their brain. I mean, literally building the neural pathways for healthy relationships and how they learn to regulate their emotions later on.
Wow, so something as simple as responding to a baby's cry consistently can have a huge impact on their brain development.
It really does. It shows how powerful those early interactions are. And when those needs aren't met consistently, or if a child is dealing with chronic stress or neglect, those neural pathways develop differently.
And that can make it harder for them to have healthy relationships, manage their emotions, and deal with challenges as they get older.
Yeah, and it can even affect their physical health. There's more and more research showing the link between early childhood experiences and our well-being throughout our whole lives. It can impact everything from your immune system to your chances of getting chronic diseases.
That's incredible. Everything is so connected. It really shows how those early years are so important for setting the stage for our lives.
Absolutely.
Uh,
And this brings us back to recognizing the different ways trauma can show up. It's not always those big, obvious traumatic events that we usually think of.
you're right, like what Oprah was saying about corporal punishment. It was normal in her community, but it still affected how she saw herself and her relationships. It
Hmm.
really shows how something can be totally accepted in a culture and still be harmful to individuals.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to start noticing those more subtle ways that trauma can affect our lives and the lives of people around us.
So it's not about dwelling on the past or blaming our parents for everything right. It's more about understanding how those early experiences affected us so we can start to heal and move on.
That's it. It's about recognizing those patterns, understanding where they came from, and then making a conscious effort to create a different experience for ourselves and for the next generation.
Okay, I get that. But how do we actually move from just coping to actually healing? Where do we even start? Sometimes it feels like such a huge task.
I know it can be overwhelming, but it all starts with self-awareness. It's about paying attention to our thoughts and feelings and behaviors and recognizing when we're reacting in ways that might be connected to those past experiences.
So it's like when Oprah realized that her anxiety about confrontation was really rooted in her childhood fear of being punished.
Exactly. That's a perfect example of seeing a pattern and understanding where it came from. It's all about connecting those dots.
So once we have that awareness, what's next?
Then we can start working on healthier ways to cope. We can learn to regulate our emotions, manage stress, and build our resilience.
So instead of pouring another glass of wine or reaching for the potato chips when I'm stressed, I could try going for a walk, meditating, or talking to a friend.
That's the idea. It's about finding healthy ways to express your emotions and coming up with strategies that work for you. It's like building a toolbox full of resources you can use when things get tough.
What about those deeper wounds? The kind of trauma that might need more than a walk in the park or a chat with a friend? How do we approach those?
Well, that's where therapy can be really helpful. A good therapist can give you a safe space to process those experiences, develop coping mechanisms, and really start to heal.
And that's where that shift from what's wrong with you to what happened to you is so important, right? It creates a space of empathy and understanding, which seems crucial for healing to even begin.
Absolutely. It lets us approach ourselves and others with compassion and curiosity instead of judgment and blame. It creates the conditions for healing to take place.
And reminds us that we're all on this journey, we're all works in progress.
Exactly. And even if those early experiences weren't perfect, it's never too late to understand how they affected us and build a life that's more fulfilling. Healing is always possible.
This idea that healing is possible is really powerful, especially as we're going deeper into these concepts. Speaking of building a more fulfilling life, Oprah and Dr. Perry also talk about the importance of relational density. Can you remind me what they mean by that?
Sure. Relational density is basically about the quality of our connections with other people. It's about having a network of people we can rely on who can help us through tough times and support us as we grow.
So it's not just about having lots of friends on social media, it's about building those deeper, more meaningful connections with people who really care about us and who we can count on.
Exactly. And those connections can come from anywhere. Family, friends, mentors, support groups, even online communities. It's about finding those places where you feel safe and understood.
I love that, finding safe havens. It's like building a web of support that can catch you when you fall and lift you up when you need it.
And those connections don't just magically appear. We have to put in the work to build them.
So how do we do that? How do we find those people who really get us and who can offer that support and understanding? I think a lot of people struggle with that, especially if they didn't have those strong connections when they were growing up.
That's a great question. It starts with being open to connecting with people, putting ourselves out there, even if it feels a little scary or vulnerable. It's about taking a chance and letting people see the real you.
So like joining a club or taking a class or even just striking up a conversation with someone new, just putting myself out there and seeing what happens.
Exactly. And it's also about being a good friend, being someone who listens and offers support to the people in your life.
It's like giving what you want to receive, creating a web of support that lifts everyone up.
That's beautifully put. And that leads us to another really powerful concept from Oprah and Dr. Perry's work, post-traumatic wisdom.
Oh, right. That's about finding meaning and purpose in our pain, isn't it? Turning those tough experiences into something positive.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that even though trauma can have these really devastating effects, it can also be what pushes us to grow and change. It can help us understand ourselves and the world around us on a much deeper level.
Like how Oprah uses her platform to talk about childhood trauma and advocate for healing and resilience. She's taken her pain and turned it into this incredible force for good.
Exactly. Or like that young girl, Ali, who saw this horrific tragedy but ended up becoming this amazingly compassionate and caring person. She took her experience and channeled it into helping others, making a real difference in the world.
Her story is so inspiring. It reminds us that even when we go through unimaginable pain, the human spirit can still find a way to heal and thrive. It gives me so much hope.
And it really highlights how important it is to create a culture of empathy and understanding, a world where we can support each other through our struggles and celebrate our resilience.
So what does all this mean for us? What are the main takeaways we can use in our own lives? We've talked about so much, it's helpful to boil it down to some actionable steps.
I think one of the biggest takeaways is that we need to be more curious about our own stories and the stories of people around us. We need to approach each other with that sense of, what happened to you?
So instead of judging or criticizing, we take a step back and try to understand the experiences that might have shaped someone's behavior. It's about starting with compassion and curiosity.
Exactly. And remembering that healing is a journey, not a destination. It takes time, effort, and support.
And it's a journey we don't have to do alone. We can reach out for support, build connections, and create those safe spaces where we can heal and grow.
Absolutely. We need each other. We need those safe havens, those connections that remind us we're not broken, that we're worthy of love and belonging.
And even though we might carry the scars of our past, those scars don't have to define us. They can be reminders of our strength, our resilience, our ability to grow.
They can even be sources of wisdom, guiding us towards a life that's more compassionate and fulfilling.
I love that. It's a beautiful reminder that even when things are really dark, there's always hope for healing and transformation.
And that hope, that resilience, that's what makes us human.
This has been such an insightful and empowering conversation. It's really changed the way I think about trauma and healing. But before we wrap up, I want to go back to something we touched on earlier, this idea that the way we're loved as children shapes our entire worldview.
Yeah, that's such a fundamental concept, and I think it deserves a deeper look.
Okay, let's dive in. What does it really mean to be loved in a way that helps us develop in a healthy way? Is it just about meeting our basic needs, or is there more to it? I think that's where people get tripped up, understanding what healthy love actually looks like and feels like.
It's a complicated question, and it definitely goes beyond just the physical needs. It's about creating an environment where the child feels attuned to, where they feel seen, heard, and understood.
Okay, I'm interested. Tell me more about this attunement thing. What does that look like in real life?
So attunement is really about the caregiver's ability to accurately read a child's cues and then respond in a way that's sensitive and appropriate for what the child needs. It's about being present and engaged, really seeing the child and getting their needs, even if they can't put those needs into words.
So you're not just fulfilling those basic needs, but you're also paying attention to how those needs are communicated and responding in a way that lets the child know you get them.
Yes. It's not just about sticking a bottle in a baby's mouth when they cry. It's about trying to understand why they're crying. Are they hungry, tired, scared? Do they just need some company? And then responding in a way that addresses that specific need.
It almost sounds like a dance
Yeah.
where you're both in sync, responding to each other's movements. And only in this case, it's about responding to those emotional cues, right?
I like that, yeah. It's like a dance. And when that attunement is there, it creates a sense of safety and security for the child. It's like you're telling them, your needs are important, I see you, I hear you, you matter to me.
And it's that foundation of security that allows them to go out and explore the world and learn and grow. It helps them develop their sense of self and become more resilient.
Exactly. And it shapes their whole worldview. Children who have that consistent attunement tend to develop a sense of trust, both in themselves and in the world around them. They learn that their needs can be met, that they deserve love, and they belong.
But what about those of us who didn't have that kind of attunement growing up? Those of us who maybe didn't feel seen or heard or understood. Is it still possible to develop that sense of security and trust?
Definitely. Our brains are amazing. They're constantly adapting. Even if those early experiences weren't the best, we're not doomed. We can actually rewire those neural pathways, those blueprints for how we experience love and connection.
So you're saying we can actually change those deep-seated patterns that were formed in childhood. How's that even possible?
It does take effort and time and often support from others. But yeah, it's totally possible. It starts with noticing those patterns, understanding where they come from, and then consciously choosing to create a different experience for ourselves.
So it's about recognizing those times when we're reacting based on those old hurts and patterns, and then making a choice to respond differently in a healthier way.
Exactly. It's about rewiring those pathways in our brains by creating new experiences that challenge those old beliefs and patterns.
So if I grew up believing my needs weren't important, maybe because my caregivers weren't so attuned to me, I can start to challenge that belief by surrounding myself with people who do see me, who do hear me, who do value what I need.
That's right. It's about seeking out those corrective experiences, those relationships that can provide the attunement that we might have missed when we were younger.
And by really paying attention to how those new experiences make me feel, noticing that feeling of safety, that sense of belonging that comes from being truly seen and understood.
You got it. It's about building new pathways, new blueprints for how we relate to people and how we see ourselves in the world. It's a really powerful process and something we can all do.
This whole deep dive has been so eye-opening. It really makes you realize how powerful those early childhood experiences are in shaping who we are. But I also feel a sense of hope Like even if those experiences weren't perfect, we're not stuck. We can heal, we can grow, and we can create a life that's more fulfilling.
I think that's what's so important. Recognizing that we have the power to change, to heal, and to write a new story for ourselves.
What really stands out to you from all of this? What feels most relevant to your own experiences or the people you care about? It's definitely something to think about as you go about your day.
And remember, you're not alone in this. Everyone has a story. Everyone has wounds. And everyone has the potential to heal and grow.
Until next time, keep diving deep.